Deb, welcome to the show. It's so wonderful to have you here to speak about your work, about your book, about migration, about belonging, spirituality, faith, and facilitation, maybe.
Sounds delicious.
Oh, your voice is suddenly.
Is this better?
No,
No.
something has happened with your microphone suddenly.
I don't know what it could be. Now, still not good.
You're very far away. Have you changed something?
Well, should we stop recording? And
Oh, now you're back.
now I'm back.
Yes, perfect.
Sunspots. I don't know.
Um, so if you just say thank you, I'm happy to be here or something, that'd be
Okay,
confusing.
yes. Well, I love everything you said. It really sounds like a delicious conversation. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Thank you. And I always start with the beginning that sometimes is not even a beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I did once with a very, very interesting little organization. Um, so you might call it stealth facilitation, or I I love, I don't put this on my business card, but to call myself a quilter of
Beautiful.
starting to sew back together a very fragmented world
Mm,
that is, for me, out of right relationship.
and a quilt repurposes leftovers of fabrics, putting them together, something new, cozy, sheltering.
Exactly.
Mm. And to what extent has your own vita, where, if I'm not mistaken, you started in corporate and then became a reverend?
I actually thought I would be making my living in higher education teaching French.
Oh, yes, I remember
And
you mentioned.
there was no work at the time. And I didn't want to go back to school to find that yet again, what I had studied and prepared for wasn't possible. So I really actually never saw myself in the business world.
Mm,
IBM was looking for people with teaching backgrounds at the time, medium-sized companies who had never had that had never had a computer before were finally able to afford a real computer. So it was a very exciting time, and we really had the margin to be a resource for our customers, to really
mm,
spend time with them, get to know them, get to understand their business.
yeah. And then you gave that up
Mhm.
to totally change careers
Yes. Yeah.
and turn towards the spirituality in church.
Not to church, but to spirituality.
Mm,
I don't know if this exists in Europe, Miriam, but in the US, we have a profession that's called chaplaincy, to
hmm
be a chaplain. So I happen to be an interfaith chaplain, and most of us don't want to serve in a congregational setting. We study the major wisdom traditions of the world. And you could say, on one hand, we know enough to be dangerous. On the other hand, we know enough to establish respect and trust.
mm,
And then once that's established, then it's a heart connection. And so there are chaplains in hospice, there are chaplains in hospital, there are even corporate chaplains these days. Um, but it's really about spiritual care,
hmm
and in that we can do in facilitation in our daily lives with our friends, with our families. And yeah, it's taken me years to really have that work on me, transform me, and it's just a constantly evolving journey.
What do you mean by that? What is it that It'll make you a better, yeah, quilter in this world. And
Yeah.
I have to ask that why is quilter different than facilitator? So where would you see the
Hmm.
nuances?
Well, let me start with the facilitator quilter. And I think it's fun to play with these terms. Um, for me, when you quilt, there is something that's created. And you could say, well, facilitation, we create webs of relationships. Absolutely. But to have a quilt that has like the word that you used was cozy,
Hmm.
of something that is really, this just look like fragments. And now with the creativity of an individual or something flowing through
Mm,
that individual, probably better said, um, that creates something beautiful and even unexpected.
mm,
When I sit down and do art, it's like, where did that come from? Where did that come from? So some people would use religious language, but many people would just, some people would call it a field, some people would call it many different things. And, for me, it really doesn't matter. It's life.
hmm.
There's a life force, there's a vitality and an energy that
Mm,
comes
mm,
from a well.
yeah. And the words that come up for me are trust.
Mm,
So
safety and trust
that
really
something will
go together.
emerge.
Mhm.
Maybe
And you don't
intuition.
have to make it. I mean, the rose knows how to bloom.
Hmm.
The child knows how to grow. The acorn knows how to become an oak tree.
Yeah.
So creating the trust, creating the relationship.
And what do you think is, especially in this world of interface,
Mm,
where when I look into the world, I try to reduce the amount of news that I'm consuming in a day. But what I see is polarity,
mm,
um, stubbornness, a lack of curiosity, um, trauma, not a lack
trauma.
of, but the existence of. Um, so where do you come in this field with this openness that I think we're significantly lacking
Mm,
in the bridge building?
mm. When I had a coaching practice, I called it Identity Matters.
Mm,
And the tagline was become who you are, which is kind of a paradox.
hmm.
In a sense, I'm already who I've always been and will be, but I'm still in the process of becoming as well. So a lot of it for me comes back to identity, this notion of identity. And they're all kind of fake at the end of the day. We make them up, they're not real. And it's an art and a practice to shed old identities
Mm,
that don't bring life. That's always my barometer. Is this really, is there life here? Is there juice here?
mm,
So that's a big part of it. And where I live, boy, talk about polarity right now. Um, yeah, it's like in this idea that we take something like a country that doesn't really exist and we just clutch so tightly to that in favor of, I mean, we're destroying life. We're destroying ourselves, it seems, by
mm,
ecocide, by war. It's all related. Um, but we're not living in a way that really has a reverence for life
hmm.
is for me what a healthy culture does
Mm,
is it grounds us to the land, it grounds us to place. Um, Resma Menakem here introduced me to this notion of that a healthy culture is, yes, it's aesthetics, but it's so much more than that. It's what grounds us to place and helps us understand that we have responsibilities to each other and
Yeah.
to life, that our allegiance, perhaps, it is it's not owed to a nation state. It's
Mm,
owed to life. When the birds migrate, as they are right now where I live, um, they don't carry a passport.
hmm
When I was a kid, and the first time I left the state of Michigan, where I'm from, I think it was my dad in the front seat said, we're about ready to cross the state line. And I'm looking out the window for a literal line. And, these are in our heads. A mountain range is a real border, an ocean is a real border, but these countries are made up.
hmm Yeah. And I would like to speak about your book Borderlands
Mm,
in in
a good
and I
segue.
put it on a short parking lot um, to come back what you said about identity um, and connectedness to land. And
Mm.
I agree that identity is made up, and the most difficult part is to become who we are, to kind of peel back all the armor
All the armor.
that we have learned to grow and to protect us. Um, I would be curious if you have what your understanding of authenticity is.
That word resonates so much with me, and also solidarity.
Mm,
Um, and coming back to the topic of facilitation, perhaps I could make a distinction between what I, as an individual, want to say and need to say, and
mm,
that's real. But at a deeper level, there are things that want and need to be said. And that comes from a place that is beyond me as an individual. And it often takes great courage, not only to say, but to say skillfully enough where it can be received.
mm,
There's that word transmission that actually used to mystify me. I didn't really understand what people meant when they used that term. The best way that I could define it for myself is that authenticity is when the energy that I'm putting out is consistent with my words, with my body language.
mm. Yeah, consistency. Because I had a conversation with someone who was speaking about um, basically about trauma responses or some protections that we have learned, like the people pleaser in us and the arrogance. And so all these, again, it's a sort of armor that we put on in order to cope with the world around us when we don't feel strong enough to, or maybe courageous enough to show our real self. And then the question is this still authenticity? And if
Mm,
it's not, what does it take to actually be authentic? Because it then almost becomes surreal or too big for a human to achieve.
mhm, mhm. Yes, you mentioned earlier, I don't think you used the word stuckness, but it was along that line of, my study over the past 6 years, let's say, of collective trauma, it's been the only thing that I have found for myself that goes deep enough to explain not only why we seem to be so deeply stuck in doing things that are against the best interest
Mm.
of the continuity of complex life on this planet. Um, the United States has a $1 trillion military budget for 2026. And, my understanding of the rapidly destabilizing climate is that we're at a crossroads. I was raised with a notion of war is normal.
Mm.
We've always done it. People have always done it. They'll always do it. And it's like, well, that's a story.
Hmm.
But is it true? Are there proof points that living in relationship is possible? And I feel we have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples. And we all come from Indigenous peoples.
Yeah. And this was what I was thinking as you mentioned land. I wonder whether, especially when we grow up in cities, um, or in Europe, we're so detached from ancestral spirits
Mm.
or cultures. Um, and so in Europe, I think we're too detached because we didn't keep track. And then in the US or in Australia and New Zealand, or even in countries like Ireland, might be different. From what I hear, there's then a big trauma around it,
Mm.
that hasn't been processed and is difficult to articulate. How can a society heal from that? And what's the role of spirituality?
Yeah. Boy, I think I could write book after book on this, but it's something that can be felt. I find that things aren't right. We're not living well. I can say that in my own experience, let me step back a minute. A friend of mine in Detroit who happens to be African American, I was talking about wandering around a small area trying to find the parking lot at the convention center. And they were preparing for the Grand Prix, roads were closed, other events were happening, this and that. And she said, yes, this is the Disneyfication of Detroit, Disneyland,
Mm,
that, other people with money come in and they decide what we get to have, what is cool. We don't get to decide. And so, as a person of privilege where I live, I recognize in hindsight that I could live in Disneyland as a person of privilege. I could travel the world in a bubble of privilege, really unaware of what is happening a street away and
mm,
what people are living with. So a lot of my journey seems to be about quilting, but establishing a larger solidarity. I was a chaplain in Detroit when I say predominantly African American community, it was probably 97% of our patients and families were African American. I didn't know whether I would be accepted. I didn't know whether I would be any good at being with people at some of the most tender and painful times of their lives. And so that for me was an example of border crossing, of learning how to be humble enough to be with people with a radically different life experience and who are You could say in the United States or even in the world, there's a caste system
Hmm.
that we're born into.
Hmm.
And so, strangely enough, that happened to me the first time I left the country. I was in France, but I mean deep France in Brittany, studying there. And we were a small group of 10, and we were the only people who spoke English, apparently, other than at the university. Um, so it was a culture shock. I was 19. It sounds ridiculous to say that now, but that's been a lot of it is, I used to think everybody thinks like I think, like my family thinks, and it was really shocking to learn that no, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
In the reaction, you mentioned the term armor up, that's really real to protect the heart, to not want to be vulnerable.
And I and it's interesting because then it's on both sides. I hear the vulnerability or insecurity that you had when then offering care and support um, to the African American community. Um, and it's interesting. I had a exploration call for the podcast today um, with a Maori in New Zealand,
Mm.
and she asked me if I had more Aboriginal guests on the podcast or indigenous facilitators on the podcast, and I realized how I felt very vulnerable because I haven't only few, and I realized that it was out of an insecurity in me that I am afraid of not knowing how to navigate which questions are appropriate or maybe not appropriate, not knowing enough, being perceived as ignorance. And all of that insecurity has held me back of reaching out and asking more curious questions. And it's only now recently that I'm catching up.
Mm.
Um, and I would be curious to learn from you how to overcome that or how to navigate that space.
I love this example. For me, this is so tender and it's so human.
Mm.
So let's normalize that. And one practical suggestion is to really know that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt others. We're going to be hurt. I mean, I have had experiences. I'm thinking of one particular conference where the intensity of the room and the diversity in the room was so intense that I felt like the top of my head
Mm.
was going to come off. This is hard work, and it really takes intention and commitment. Um, and as someone who's, I've known not privilege and I've known a lot of privilege at the same time. And to really start to put myself in the shoes of someone who has not had that privilege. And every day, I mean, you look at major things in our lineages of dispossession, from war, from natural disaster, from many, many things. But there's also the little mini put down,
Hmm.
the microaggression that so many people just live with every day. I had one woman in Detroit at an event. She used to be a social worker. She was African American. And she said, when I'm in a room of white people, my stomach is tied up in knots.
Mm.
And that was really hard. That was the first time I had heard that. That was really hard to hear, but why must I be spared discomfort
Mm,
when my sisters and brothers live with discomfort every day of their lives? You know,
yeah. So
what?
I'd be curious, how do you create that space where someone would speak their truth?
Mm,
Um, Trusting that
mhm,
those around are willing to sit in that discomfort.
mhm.
Because you mentioned that you have been at events where there was this tension. And how can you cut through that or use that or
Mm.
change it?
Yeah, to step back a little bit, for me, some type of spiritual practice in these times when things seem to be unraveling. All of the foundations of reality is those of us in modern culture, if that's a culture, would describe it. It's like people feel that even if they can't express it in language, it is felt.
Hmm.
Fear, anxiety, anger, grief is a
Hmm.
big one. There's a lot of grief in my experience under the anger,
Hmm.
my own and that of others. So a spiritual practice can be anything. It can be art. It can be a walk in a beautiful place, slowing down, being soft, allowing the heart to soften, having a feeling of spaciousness that I rarely had in the last 10 years of my work in the corporate world. I left burned out and stressed out and just always felt overwhelmed, always felt pressure. And some people call that an adrenaline lifestyle. With adrenaline is a drug, and
Hmm.
it's really it's a detox to get off adrenaline itself.
Yeah.
But
And it's,
part of
mm,
that, as I say, is just I'm in recovery right now with what I would call a spirit of joy and playfulness because I've been deconstructing the stories that I've been told, how life is, how life has to be. Um, and it's been painful, it's been dark, and I am still committed to that deconstruction. And for me to walk into a room with this heaviness, it's not helpful for me and it's not helpful for other people.
mm, yeah. What has helped you to deconstruct it?
Hmm. I find intention, a clear heart-based intention, saturated with juiciness, can be just cast off into the universe and takes on a very mysterious and magical life of its own.
Mm,
So, to do anything, first you have to want to,
mm,
and then you'll need some skills and some this and some that
yeah.
organization. But the real thing is to really acknowledge and to be willing. I'm going to go back to this notion of comfort and discomfort, which is a person of privilege. Um, I didn't want to be uncomfortable. I wanted my latte in the morning and this and that. And so it's this commitment, this allegiance to life to say, I want to be well. I want others to be well. I want to live in a real culture that affirms life.
Mm. And for that, you did travel. What's been the experience and then maybe the drive or calling that got you to write Borderlands? And maybe you can give us an idea of what the book
Mhm.
is actually about.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I receive what I would call a message in the bottle. Like you were out at sea and, along comes this bottle or this jar and you pick it up and there's a piece of paper in it and you open it and there's a message there and it says, do this, go here. And it makes no sense. So I still speak fairly fluent French. My Spanish wasn't very good. Most of our guests at the border are from Latin America, but they come from all over the world as well. I even get a chance to use my French from time to time with a person from Congo. So I got a message in a bottle that said, Sister, you need to go to the border. And I'm like, what? How does this make any sense with my life? I couldn't see it right away as another boarding crossing. I couldn't see it related to my work on climate and water protection. And as I've grown into elderhood, in the past, when I would get one of these messages, I would sit on it, sometimes for years, and not act. And I've learned to recognize when it's not just, oh, a passing thought, but it's like, you need to pay attention to this.
A calling.
And it was like going to seminary. I felt like I was the last person in the world to be coming at life and really developing my own spiritual authority. So I sat on that one for about a year and it wouldn't go away. So over time, it's become clearer and clearer when things aren't going to go away. So I don't take as much time to surrender
Hmm.
to that cost. So that's how it happened. And I didn't intend to write a book. I actually kept a private group on social media, and I wanted it to be private because I didn't want to take any, what, from this. And I mean, I'm an immigrant.
So you
Like,
went to El Paso, for those in the audience who don't know your story.
yes.
You went to El
So
Paso.
I won't be in El Paso for the entire year. The US-Mexico border is incredibly long. I think it's about 200 miles. I don't know what that would be in kilometers, but it's very, very long. And I didn't even know where to go, but I had a younger friend I had met in seminary, and he seemed to be finding making his life at the border. So I went to him and said, "Can you give me a couple suggestions on organizations who are doing good work that I could look into?" And he was just very matter of fact, and he said, "You go to Annunciation House." And I'm like, oh, and I looked at the website. It looked compelling. It had been around since 1978, so many decades of experience. And I'm just like, well, I don't have to make this into a project like I used to make things into a project that didn't need to be. And yeah, I went, and it was really disorienting at first. I mean, my stomach would just get tied in a knot when I would answer the phone and the person didn't speak anything but Spanish. Um, I could do like simple transactions, like, my baby needs diapers. I could ask what size, or, I'm booking my plane ticket. Can you talk to my relative? Yes. Simple things like that, but a real conversation and to really understand people's stories was something else. So the first winter, I likened it to the journey of a pilgrimage. The first year was initiation. The second winter was purification, and the third winter was rebirth. So I kept, you could call it a blog, you could call it a diary. It was a way for me to digest the experience of the day and to share it with others who had never had any comparable experience with this. And there was a lot of emotion and divisiveness building around this issue of whose land is this anyway? Those types of things. So at the end of in the third winter, people they could invite their friends. They were starting to say, oh, this is good. You should turn this into a book.
Mm. How has facilitation helped you in this phase?
Mm. Oh, goodness. Um, at times, I'm the facilitator of addressing issues, concerns with my fellow volunteers, with our guests. But other times, I'm allowing people with more experience than I have
Mm.
to facilitate in this dance of, I used to think I had to be in control all
Mm.
the time. And life has gotten a little easier for me, actually quite a lot easier now that I've realized I'm not in control of too much other than how I respond to
Mm.
situations. So, there's a modeling, but just to kind of riff on that a little bit, this is the kind of work that can only be done in community
Mm.
because it can be so intense with the stories, with the experience, with the needs. One example is I've worked in all of our shelters. Annunciation House is a network of shelters. But I come back to one in particular, and that particular shelter is the only one that is wheelchair accessible. And we get the people who've come over the border wall, which is about 30 feet high. I can't translate into to meters very readily, but it's high. And, there are people on the other side who can help you over. But once you get to the top, you're literally falling off the wall. So there are people who land unhurt and scamper away into the shadows. There are many people who die from
Mm.
that. And we're starting to actually see the numbers now. And it's really astounding what we're seeing in the El Paso area. Others break their bodies and have to come to us in what they call an external fixator, where there are rods that are pressing into their bones, their legs, their ankles to keep the bones in place while they heal. A nurse might say that here in the US, they say that they might see this a couple times in an entire career. And with us, this is not as true right now. Things are always changing at the border. Um, but we could have 5 to 8 people
Mm.
who've had these surgeries
In a year.
at any given time.
Mm.
At any given time. So we would remind it, I think I liked it because it reminded me of hospital chaplaincy, which I got into later in life and didn't really have the energy to continue doing, even though I loved it. But we would do 3 rounds of pain medication based on doctor's orders. Our guests had to be ambulatory because we don't have a nursing staff. They have
Mm.
to be able to go to the bathroom by themselves and that type of thing. But higher needs and even just if you don't care about the suffering of your sisters and brothers, the expense of the wall, of the militarized borders,
Mm.
of these surgeries.
Yeah.
and any after effects. So why is this happening? There's a lot of money to be made.
Mm, yeah,
There's a border in industrial complex. Is there our other
yeah.
industrial complex?
And I'm curious about the work there. Again, so the audience, they're facilitators, right? In
Mhm.
all different um, ways. And I think what you've done is to hold space and to care for and then I guess many of it will be non-verbal or with very little verbal resources. So how did you do that? And in a under conditions where everyone is in survival mode, literally.
Mm. There is a grace that I have found. And it's not a word I used to use very often, but there is a grace, a light that is in these houses that can be felt by the volunteers. It can be felt by our guests, even though as most of our people under normal conditions, whatever that is, that we would receive 19 people from released from authorities. They had sponsors. They would be with us just a day, 2 days, 3 days. Other people who didn't have a sponsor, other extenuating circumstances, but simply the respect,
Mm,
the recognition that we're all, at the end of the day, people with a common human experience
mm,
of love, of loss, of family, of friendship, of insecurities with work, being able to make a living, to feel safe in our homes, in on our streets. So just that grace, I don't know what other word to use
mm,
with that, of that it carries us.
yeah.
And again, the notion of a community of care, which for me is one of the major medicines needed in this world right now, of if I'm grumpy and I'm having a bad day and nothing is going right, one of my colleagues is not having a bad day and can give me a break, say, go for a walk around the block, do whatever, and then come back.
Mm,
Just and we would meet in the morning during the week, before, after breakfast, depending on the house, and have a reflection and deal with whatever business came up. But, it was a chance for people to just check in and say, I've had some difficult news in my family, and
mhm,
I'm just not feeling very well today. The situation that we ran into yesterday has stayed with me. And or yeah, I'm gonna go and visit my family next week, or whatever it
yeah.
might happen to be, of just a place where we can be human and acknowledge um what's been heavy,
Mhm,
what's been bringing us joy, uh, is very helpful. Just like, facilitation in a meeting, how we start that meeting, I mean, is very different for me now. When I was in the corporate world, we have an agenda and we have a program. And yes, relationships were important, but it was more focused on the outcome and the goal. And humanity was often secondary or sacrificed. And that is not how I want to live right
mm.
now.
And what I hear, and I wonder that this sense of community and just taking the time to checking in with each other and caring what's going on outside of work or even being there to support with ideas, answers, help related to the work. is
Yeah.
something that you have created there and that is maybe easier to create when we have this very strong shared purpose.
Ah,
Whereas when
beautiful.
we're in the corporate world, the do we have a shared purpose or is it an individual purpose of just making money?
Yeah. Yes. And I was very wedded to this notion of professionalism
Mm,
earlier. And I'm not saying anything goes, that we should not have standards, ethics, common values, but in a sense, it's empty, it's transactional.
mm,
I had worked with IBM for 20 years. I didn't think I'd survive the first year because it was such a culture change for me. But when I walked out that door, it's like all that I had sacrificed of my
mm.
life. It was like a wave walking out on the shore of there was no evidence that I had been there, in that
Yeah.
the wave and the ocean would go back. So what am I sacrificing of my humanity? And why do we think that that is natural
Hmm.
and healthy? What is this? Giving ourselves permission to say, what is this about, might bring up things that I might actually have to make some changes that could involve some sacrifices and some not knowing.
Oh, yeah.
So this
That's a big one.
also is a place of courage, and that old French derivative of the heart. Courage
Mhm.
comes from the heart, the cœur.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. And it's interesting that you speak about professionalism and because in the work you were doing at the shelter, the border, um, you had to be professional in air quotes because it was about human lives. Yeah? Um, but their professionalism takes a very different. So you had to take your work seriously and to be there with your heart
Mm.
and not be careless. But it hadn't anything to do with performing, sticking to um, some random rules or jargon.
You know, Nora Bateson, I love what she says about improv
Hmm.
theater, getting off the old and tired scripts
Hmm.
that we've been following really requires a trust of ourselves to step into the unknown.
Mm.
As
100%.
facilitators, could we get lost together? Could we not have the answers?
And that's what I find so interesting that, yeah, as facilitators, we have to learn that skill because if we knew the outcome and the answer already, the group wouldn't need a facilitator.
Yeah,
And yeah, still, I think the biggest hindrance nowadays of really connecting at the workplace is the difficulty to admit that someone doesn't know.
yeah, that
And the facade and the cost to
mm,
keep that facade and armor up.
is robbing us of our humanity
Mm.
and our allegiance to life and health.
What do you think that communities back where you're living now could learn from those communities you got to know at the borders, on the borders?
Mm. I see a lot of reclaiming of culture among indigenous peoples on this land. That's another example of where cultural humility can come in handy. Of the arrogance that you mentioned earlier, and I was right there. There's nothing that I have to learn
Mm.
from this group, from this individual, from these people.
Where does it come from, this arrogance? And how can we break it?
Hmm. What comes up for me right away is just an unhealthy culture that does not want us to feel, that wants us to live, that wants me to live above the neck in my head.
Mm.
Because if I could actually see and feel, have an embodied experience,
Mm.
an emotional experience, already things would shift, that we would not tolerate the
And
pain that would come
aren't
to others.
and I agree, and there's part of me that's like, but aren't we culture? Culture is not something that, of course, it's given to us and we're born into, and we are shaping culture.
Mhm, sure.
And then I wouldn't want it to become an excuse that because that's victimization. I'm arrogant because I was born into that culture and I don't have choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like clear seeing is so important. And there's a difference between blaming. I'm going to blame an elected official. I'm going to blame this person. I'm going to blame this system. Deflects against responsibility
Hmm.
to start to see, but to own things. And so for me, a helpful barometer is if what I'm seeing brings me to a place of reckoning, and that would be more of an intellectual function. I was told these stories about who this group of people are.
Mm. Criminals,
And I'm
dangerous.
finding, yeah, dangerous, terrorists. Um, could look in the mirror and ask ourselves, who are the terrorists right now? Um, but to do that piece of it and also to see, like what I'm seeing right now, is the harm that the US government is the reigning, if not crumbling, empire of the moment. The harm that empires do in the
Mm.
world is massive. And they don't just do this abroad, but they do it at home as well with certain groups. Who can live and who must die?
Mm.
Um, so that also brings up the medicine of grieving,
Mm.
which I feel is one of the most essential medicines for not just how an individual transforms, but how a people transform. We have to do the reckoning intellectually of the narratives, what we've been told reality is, how things must be, in the heart piece, which is the pain that comes from really
Mm.
seeing the harm that these systems of death and destruction are doing in the world. That is hugely painful. I can go to my room and weep, but the really courageous act may be there's a hunger to have spaces where we can bring that sorrow
Mm,
and have that be validated as health, is life
mm.
itself, the immune system of life.
You
Calling.
mean the acknowledgement of the loss of what we thought identity was, history was, right and wrong was.
It could be many things. It could mean many things. Someone the other day was suggesting coming together in grief, and they were of another ethnicity than European background. And I could almost see what was on their mind of what could white people possibly have to grieve?
Mm,
Well, let's find out. And there are times when you need spaces for your own. And there are times when we come together, what we learn is there is one grief, there
mm.
is one sorrow.
And how do you, I think this is a very juicy and sensitive topic,
Mhm.
grief, because we all have our grief, and who is there to judge that someone's grief is bigger than others? And yes, there are some cultures who have suffered significant capital T trauma. So there's a different sort of grief.
Mhm.
And how can you, and I think that's your job as a reverend, how can you bridge or weave together this? How can you bring together a shared humanity where there is no such finger pointing? Who are you to actually have a say in this conversation?
Mhm.
Because from their perspective, they're right. And still, just because someone's suffering is bigger doesn't make someone else's suffering smaller.
Yeah,
How do
it's not
you
an Olympic, not an Olympic sport.
exactly, but how do you ground such a conversation?
Mhm. Thanks for using the word ground. Yeah, so there are two things that come up for me, and one of them is a facilitator, is a human being, is a quilter. When I show my own vulnerability appropriately, it gives other people permission to be flawed, feeling messy human beings.
Mm. And you said appropriately. Where's in
Mhm.
yours?
It's this discernment, perhaps, in the moment of what needs to be said, not making this about me,
Mm.
but is a means
Mm.
to humanize the space, to bring warmth, spaciousness, softness. So when I'm comfortable enough in myself, which is a moment to moment thing, then I can use my experience as a means.
Mm. Yeah, and then we're back to the modeling
Mhm.
and space and pace.
Yeah. Can I switch gears a minute? I want to, I'd like to read a little passage from the book.
Hmm.
Uh, is an example, is a demonstration of getting off the script, maybe. and just when humanity is in order and when we're given the words or the guidance that is most helpful. It is evening. He stands in the doorway while I am on shift. Something is definitely wrong. I sit him down and pull up a chair to sit in front of him, knee to knee. He cries and murmurs that he is going to leave his family and go out on his own. He talks about his sadness and dreams of having his own apartment and money. If you are a parent, you've probably experienced something similar. I tell him I agree with him about the difficulties of his situation, and he observe that he is right about being upset and also very brave. I tell him his life is important and that we care about him. After some time, Mom comes to fetch him and take him back to their small room where she and his four siblings sleep. He's 10 years old, bright, beautiful, and very, very sensitive. He and one of his siblings wet the bed most nights. These kids are all in school, and that's a good thing. Like most people from his country, they have nowhere to go and no permission to travel to their father. Some of these families can be with us for years. After emotionally intense moments like this, it can be soothing to fold some sheets and towels, get some fresh night air, or just sit quietly.
Mm.
How I experience this young person. I don't think I'm speaking from a place of ego, but I felt that I was able to transmit the care that is evoked by this work and by doing it in community, that something was transmitted to him
Mm.
because he showed up a little differently after that. And I could have, if I had been uncomfortable, said, look, 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 it's not so bad. Look on the bright side of what you have, rather than being able to be with him
Mm.
and feel, really receive what he was transmitting to me, the frustration.
Yeah.
All of the agony and dangers of the journey north, walking through the Darien jungle, walking by bodies for 2 to 3 days, just getting through that in itself. Many women are sexually assaulted on the journey north. And even if they don't usually use birth control, they're using birth control. I cannot imagine what this is like. There are stories that I've heard that I do not share because they are so difficult. And I don't see the value
Mm.
in sharing them, in the risk of, well, I know, I've seen. Um, no, it is not what needs to be said. And to be able to step back from some of those things, but to see how with an interaction, when I am in a moment where I can
Your sound is gone again.
do it again.
Oh, no, it's good. No, it's back.
Need to plug in just a moment. But when I am willing to get lost or just to be with another person and not trying to control, not trying to shape, not having the answers, it's a miracle. And in this interaction, I've back again. In this interaction, I feel that we were both changed.
Mm,
I feel we were both changed. And that's available in a relationship culture.
mhm,
That's available in a healthy culture
mhm.
that is really, as you said, grounded.
Yeah. And what I hear is the ability to sit with emotions, your own emotions, but also the emotions of others. As you said, without the judging, without the need to make it different. And what I heard you say, what I consider so rich is your discomfort. If you were uncomfortable, then you would make this feeling, in air quotes, wrong because it makes you uncomfortable. And then it's very difficult to really feel safe to feel all these emotions.
Exactly.
Mm,
And in coming back to the value of spiritual practice, what that has done for me is to increase my capacity to hold my own pain and sorrow. And to the degree that I can be with that, I can be with the pain of others.
mm,
And that has been the difficult gift of some of these experiences, which can be very intense, and to be aware of when I am activated, when my nervous system is activated, and to call someone else for some help, or
mm,
to say, I do one-on-one spiritual companioning with people, and a lot of the work is just being present with them, feeling with them. And when things get really intense, or, a trauma response, things fragment. They tend to speed up, they tend to compress and get tighter. And so, even that facilitation skill of saying, let's just take a minute
mm.
and pause and to breathe. I'm feeling some really intense energy in this space. And I just want to acknowledge that. Anybody else
Mm,
having that experience or another experience, let's make that okay to have an experience
yeah.
rather than be in our head. Let's get back to our 21-point plan, shall we?
Mm. Yeah, to feel the experience and to
Hmm.
normalize it, as you say. What remains your facilitation challenge?
I am really, is I'm steeping more in the field of collective trauma healing. I am aware at how long of a journey this is, how challenging this work is. And to know, I had a situation the other day that was local. It's a small organization that I've not participated in, though I know a lot of the people. But for the leader of the group, who would definitely consider herself a facilitator, um, I've been doing a little mentoring for her, and they've run into a very hot topic that is bringing up historical collective trauma for one particular set of individuals in that group. To try to broach the what I would call a courageous conversation, um, and to really see when there's a lack of readiness
Mm,
among the people, they don't have the capacity right now to make that an intelligent response.
mm,
That an individual, it's a very intelligent response to protect our hearts, but often it's from the past.
yeah.
And we go back into our childhood or an ancestral memory that's become almost encoded in our bodies of to not bite off too much where I don't have the skill to do that. And how sometimes even just having me name something, then gives permission to others in the room to name their experience and to
Mm,
say, let's take a break. With this particular group, in just tossing out some ideas in this one-on-one conversation, it's like, given that people aren't coming as often, that this has been too challenging, too difficult, there are some changes in leadership of just maybe the right thing right now is you've had a couple courageous conversations. Maybe you've taken it as far right now as you can take it. Take
yeah.
a couple months off.
How do you notice that a group is on the edge and that it might be too much for them? What
Mm,
are the early warning signs?
I think it's felt. Sometimes you can see it in body language, people crossing their arms. The tension is palpable in the room. People aren't making eye contact
Mm,
with one another.
mm. The
There's a feeling,
disconnection.
yeah, of defensiveness,
Mhm.
protection, which is not wrong.
It's almost a dissociation,
Hmm.
what I
Yeah,
hear. Yeah. Mm.
yeah.
And
So that's already a skill. And it again comes back to the spiritual practice, the increasing our own capacity
mm,
to hold tension. And I feel like it's a fiery time, right? We're seeing volcanoes that have been quiet for decades erupting. We're seeing wildfires from global warming. We're seeing many things that are happening that are really fire energy. And at times, for me at least, even if I don't have a lot going on in my day, I'm exhausted by the end of the
mm,
day because there's this tension that the air is crackling right now. And one of the leaders in collective trauma healing, Thomas Hupel, he comes out with some of these just offhand, quiet expressions I just find so valuable. He'll say, alchemy, the art of turning lead into gold,
mm,
spiritual gold, requires great heat.
mm,
In that as human beings, our tendency is this is uncomfortable. So I want to tamp this down
mm. Yeah.
rather than allowing myself to be cooked and transformed in the flames. And that's a huge trust of life in the cycle of death and rebirth and growth and fruition and decline and decay and rinse and repeat, the
Mm.
composting
Yeah.
process that when I was a hospital chaplain and had been up for hours with a family around someone who was dying, for example. And one thing that was helpful for them, in addition to affirming their own traditions, understanding, is to say, what I have learned in my own life is no matter how long the night, I know from many years of personal experience in difficult times is that the dawn eventually comes. Here in northern Michigan, the winters are long. And to have a blizzard in April is so disheartening. But eventually, when it seems like it's never going to come, the new life
Mm.
springs up from the rubble in the ash. How does that happen?
Yeah. And to go through the fire requires community and and holding the space for the grief and the fear.
And we don't have that.
Mm.
So some would say, there's another metaphor for transformation, which is the birthing process of where's the midwife?
Mm.
Who will guide and explain. And at times the midwife is not in sight.
On a global level, maybe not, but I do trust that on the local level, um, I wouldn't want to give up on the optimism of community that I see around and that exists, and the hope.
It can, and there are times when we do have the capacity
Mm.
to put hope and hopelessness on hold
Mm.
and just be
Mm.
with what is.
Final question, although this would have been a beautiful kind of ending moment. What would be your advice to your younger self?
Trust myself.
Mm.
Trust that voice, not to give authority away to others,
Mm.
to things on the outside.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Thank you for sharing your life experience and, yeah, your spiritual perspective.
Mm. And you really embody that as I experienced you, Miriam,
Mm.
of just the pace, the being willing to be quiet, to slow down, to wonder, to muse. It just brings back to me the beauty and the importance of the capacity to
Mm.
bring people together in a fragmented world.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Deb.